This is the story of poor girl steals black millionaire's wallet to save her dying mother, not knowing he's her father, as it truly unfolded. The rain hammered against the cracked windows of the emergency room waiting area, each drop echoing like a countdown timer in Maya's chest. She pressed her face against the cold glass, watching wealthy families step out of luxury cars under umbrellas held by chauffeurs, while she sat in clothes that hadn't been properly washed in weeks. Her mother's labored breathing from the hospital bed 3 floors above seemed to sync with the storm outside, both growing weaker by the hour. 22 years old, and Maya had never felt so powerless. The doctors had been clear. Without the experimental treatment, her mother had maybe 2 weeks left. The cost? $60,000. Maya made $11 an hour at the diner when they gave her shifts, which lately had been cut to barely 20 hours a week. Even if she worked every day for the next 5 years without eating or paying rent, she'd still fall short. She pulled out her phone and stared at the GoFundMe page she'd created 3 days ago. $47 raised, $47 against $60,000. The comments were worse than the amount. Strangers telling her to get a real job or stop asking for handouts. One person had written, "Maybe your mother should have made better life choices." Maya had cried for an hour after reading that one. The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical whisper, and a man walked in who seemed to carry his own weather system. Everything about him radiated success. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent. The confident stride that suggested he'd never had to ask permission for anything. The way even the hospital staff straightened their posture when they saw him. His dark skin gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and when he spoke to the receptionist, his voice carried the kind of authority that made things happen. "Marcus Wellington, to see Dr. Rodriguez," he said, and Maya noticed how the woman behind the desk immediately picked up her phone. No questions asked, no insurance cards demanded. Maya had heard that name before. Marcus Wellington, the tech mogul who'd built his empire from nothing, whose face graced magazine covers with headlines about the American dream realized. She'd seen him on the news just last week, announcing another charitable foundation, another $1 million donation to some cause that would probably help people like her, but not her specifically, not in time, not when it mattered. He took a seat across from her in the waiting area, and Maya caught a glimpse of his wallet as he pulled out his phone. It was thick, leather, expensive-looking, the kind of wallet that probably held more cash than she'd see in 6 months. Her heart started beating faster, and she hated herself for what she was thinking. But then she remembered her mother's voice that morning, so weak it was barely a whisper. "Baby, don't you worry about me. You've got your whole life ahead of you." The way her mother's hand felt like paper when Maya held it. The way the nurses exchanged those looks when they thought no one was watching. The looks that said time was running out. Maya's phone buzzed. A text from the hospital billing department. Final notice. Payment required within 48 hours to continue treatment. She looked at Marcus Wellington again. He was scrolling through his phone with the casual indifference of someone whose biggest worry was probably which restaurant to choose for dinner. His jacket hung open, revealing the wallet in his inside pocket. He was maybe 15 feet away, completely absorbed in whatever was on his screen. The thought crept in like poison. He probably wouldn't even notice. He probably had more money in that wallet than her mother needed. He probably spent more on lunch than Maya made in a month. And here he was, in a hospital, probably visiting someone who could afford the best care money could buy, while her mother was slowly dying 3 floors up because Maya couldn't scrape together enough money to save her. The rational part of her mind screamed that this was wrong, that she wasn't a thief, that there had to be another way. But desperation has its own logic, and right now, that logic was louder than her conscience. If you're reading this and thinking you'd never consider something so desperate, I hope you never have to find out what you're capable of when someone you love is dying and you're holding the power to save them. Maya stood up slowly, her legs shaking. She walked toward the vending machines near where Marcus was sitting, fumbling in her pockets for change she didn't have. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the waiting room could hear it. She dropped a quarter, intentionally, and it rolled toward his chair. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely audible as she bent down to retrieve the coin. Sorry, I'm so clumsy." Marcus looked up from his phone and smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her stomach twist with guilt. "No worries at all," he said, and his voice was kind, patient, nothing like the cold indifference she'd expected from someone so wealthy. As she straightened up, her hand brushed against his jacket. The wallet slipped into her palm so smoothly it felt like the universe was helping her commit this crime. She mumbled another apology and walked quickly toward the bathroom, her entire body trembling. Inside the bathroom stall, Maya opened the wallet with shaking hands. There was more cash than she dared to hope for, easily $3,000 in crisp hundreds. But it was the other contents that made her freeze. A driver's license with his photo and address, credit cards, and tucked behind those, a small, faded photograph that made her blood turn to ice. It was a picture of a young black woman with kind eyes and a bright smile, holding a baby. Maya recognized the woman immediately. It was her mother, but 23 years younger, and the baby in her arms, with the same dark curls and wide eyes that Maya saw in the mirror every day, was unmistakably her. Her hands started shaking so violently she nearly dropped the wallet. Written on the back of the photo in her mother's handwriting were the words, "Marcus and Maya, 1 month old, my whole world." The bathroom walls seemed to close in around her. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of cosmic joke, some impossible coincidence. But the evidence was right there in her hands, proof of a connection she'd never known existed. A father she'd never met, sitting 15 feet away from her while she'd just stolen his wallet. Maya's mind raced back through 22 years of questions her mother had deflected. "Where's my father? Why don't I have a dad?" Her mother's standard response had always been the same. "He was a good man who had to make difficult choices. Maybe someday you'll understand." Now she understood. Marcus Wellington, the Marcus Wellington, was her father, and she'd just robbed him. The irony was so sharp it felt like a physical pain. She'd been prepared to steal from a stranger to save her mother, only to discover she was stealing from the one person who might actually help her willingly. But that realization came with another, more terrifying thought. If Marcus was her father, why hadn't he been there? Why had her mother struggled alone for 22 years while he built an empire? Maya stuffed the money into her pocket and walked back to the waiting area on unsteady legs. Marcus was still there, but now he was standing, patting his pockets with a confused expression. He was looking for his wallet. "Excuse me," he said to the receptionist. "I seem to have misplaced my wallet. Has anyone turned one in?" Maya watched from across the room as he retraced his steps, checking under chairs, asking other people in the waiting area if they'd seen anything. The guilt was eating her alive, but the money in her pocket felt like her mother's lifeline. $3,000 wouldn't cover the full treatment, but it would buy time, maybe enough time to figure out the rest. But as she watched this man, her father, search helplessly for his stolen wallet, something inside her broke. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about 22 years of questions, about a mother who'd raised her alone, about a father who'd apparently abandoned them both. Maya approached him slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Wellington?" He turned, and up close, she could see features that mirrored her own, the shape of his eyes, the curve of his mouth, the way he tilted his head when he was thinking. How had she not noticed before? "Yes," he said, and his voice was patient despite his obvious stress about the missing wallet. I found this," Maya said, pulling the wallet from her pocket. It was on the floor by the vending machines. Relief flooded his face. "Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me." He opened the wallet to check its contents, and Maya held her breath, waiting for him to notice the missing cash. but he seemed more focused on something else. He pulled out the faded photograph and stared at it for a long moment. "That's a beautiful picture," Maya said softly. Though her voice was shaking, Marcus looked up at her, and for the first time, really looked at her. She watched his expression change as he took in her features, the resemblance that was impossible to ignore once you knew what to look for. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Maya," she whispered. "Maya Johnson." The wallet slipped from his hands and clattered to the floor. Neither of them moved to pick it up. "Johnson," he repeated, and his voice was barely audible. "Your mother, is her name Sarah Johnson?" Maya nodded, tears starting to blur her vision. Marcus closed his eyes and took a shaky breath. When he opened them again, they were filled with 22 years of regret. "I've been looking for you," he said. "I've been looking for both of you for so long." The waiting room around them seemed to fade away. Other people's conversations became white noise. The only thing that existed was this moment, this impossible reunion that had started with theft and was ending with truth. "Are looking for us?" Maya's voice cracked. "We've been here the whole time. We've been struggling, barely surviving, while you—" She gestured at his expensive suit, his obvious wealth. "You don't understand," Marcus said, and there was pain in his voice that money couldn't fix. "Your mother, she disappeared. One day she was there, and the next day she was gone. No forwarding address, no note, nothing. I hired private investigators. I searched for years. I never stopped looking." Maya felt the world tilt on its axis. That's not what happened. She said you left. She said you made a choice." "I made a choice," Marcus said quietly. "I chose to find you. I've been choosing that every day for 22 years. The truth hit Maya like a physical blow. Her mother had lied, not maliciously, maybe, but she'd lied about everything, and Maya had built her entire understanding of her father, of herself, on that lie. "Why would she—" Maya started, but the words died in her throat, because suddenly she understood. Her mother had been young, scared, probably overwhelmed by the prospect of raising a child with a man who was already showing signs of the ambition that would eventually make him wealthy. Maybe she'd thought she was protecting Maya from a life of uncertainty. Maybe she'd thought she was setting Marcus free to pursue his dreams. "She was protecting you," Marcus said, as if reading her thoughts. "She probably thought she was doing the right thing. But Maya," his voice broke, "I would have chosen you. I would have chosen both of you, every time." The stolen money in Maya's pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. She'd taken $3,000 from her own father, money he would have given her freely if he'd known who she was, if he'd known what she needed. "Mr. Wellington, Marcus," she took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something, about the wallet, about why I'm here." But before she could confess, a nurse appeared beside them. "Maya Johnson, your mother is asking for you." The moment shattered. Reality came crashing back. Her mother dying 3 floors up, the treatment she couldn't afford, the impossible situation that had led her to this moment. "Your mother's here?" Marcus asked, and the hope in his voice was heartbreaking. Maya nodded, unable to speak. Would it be okay if I came with you?" Maya looked at this man who was a stranger and her father all at once. This person she'd hated for abandoning her and who had apparently never abandoned her at all. The money in her pocket felt heavier with each passing second. "There's something you need to know first," she said, "about why I'm here, about why I really approached you." They rode the elevator to the 3rd floor in silence, Maya's confession hanging between them like a live wire. She'd told him everything, about her mother's illness, about the treatment they couldn't afford, about the desperate plan that had led her to steal his wallet. She'd expected anger, disappointment, maybe even disgust. Instead, Marcus had listened with the kind of attention that suggested he was hearing every word she wasn't saying, along with the ones she was. $60,000, he'd said quietly when she finished. "That's what she needs." Maya had nodded, shame burning in her chest. "Maya," he'd said, I would give you $60 million if it would save her. You didn't need to steal from me. You just needed to ask. Now, standing outside her mother's hospital room, Maya felt like she was about to witness either a beautiful reunion or a devastating confrontation. 22 years of separation, of misunderstanding, of missed opportunities, all of it was about to collide in this sterile hospital room where her mother lay dying. Sarah Johnson looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her dark skin ashen, her breathing shallow and labored. But when she saw Marcus standing in the doorway behind Maya, her eyes went wide with an emotion that was part shock, part fear, and part something that might have been relief. "I'm Marcus," she whispered, and his name on her lips sounded like a prayer and an apology all at once. He moved to her bedside slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal that might flee at any sudden movement. "Hello, Sarah." Maya watched her parents, and it was strange to think of them that way, as her parents, together in the same room for the first time in her memory, and saw 22 years of history pass between them in a single look. "You found us," her mother said softly. "I never stopped looking," Marcus replied, and his voice was thick with emotion. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I thought you'd be better off without us. You had such big dreams, such potential. I didn't want to hold you back. Hold me back." Marcus sat down in the chair beside her bed, and Maya was struck by how natural it looked, as if he'd been sitting in that chair every day for years. "Sarah, you were my dreams, you and Maya. Everything I built, everything I achieved, it was all meaningless without you." Maya felt like an intruder in this moment, but she couldn't leave. This was the conversation that would finally explain her entire life, the missing pieces that would make sense of everything she'd never understood. "I was scared," her mother admitted. "And I was 19 years old with a baby, and you were talking about starting a business, about taking risks, about changing the world. I thought you'd resent us eventually. I thought we'd become the reason you never achieved your dreams. So you made the choice for both of us," Marcus said, and there was no anger in his voice, only sadness. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I was being noble. I thought I was setting you free. And instead, you set us all free to be miserable apart instead of happy together." The words hung in the air like an indictment of 22 years of wasted time. Maya watched her mother's face crumple with the weight of that realization. "I'm sorry," Sarah whispered. "No, I'm so sorry. I robbed you of watching her grow up. I robbed her of having a father. I robbed myself of—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus reached out and took her hand, carefully, gently, as if it might break. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we're here now, all three of us. That has to count for something." Maya stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Even when things got bad, even when we were struggling, why didn't you reach out to him?" Sarah looked at her daughter with eyes full of regret. "Because I was proud, because I was stubborn, because every year that passed made it harder to admit I'd made a mistake, and because—" She paused, looking between Maya and Marcus. "Because I was afraid he wouldn't want us anymore. I was afraid I'd destroyed any chance we might have had." "Sarah," Marcus said quietly, "I've wanted you every day for 22 years. Both of you." The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, marking time in a room where time suddenly felt both precious and infinite. Maya realized that this moment, this impossible, painful, beautiful moment, was what her mother had been protecting her from all these years. Not the absence of a father, but the presence of a love so deep that losing it had seemed unbearable. "The treatment," Maya said suddenly, remembering why they were all here in the first place. "The $60,000. Is there still time?" Marcus was already pulling out his phone. "Dr. Rodriguez, this is Marcus Wellington. I need to speak with you about Sarah Johnson's treatment plan. Money is no object. I want the best care available, starting immediately." Maya watched her father, and it felt natural to think of him that way now, arrange for her mother's treatment with the same efficiency he probably brought to running his business empire. But there was something different in his voice when he spoke about her mother, something tender and desperate that suggested this wasn't just about money or obligation. "It's going to be okay," he said, ending the call and turning back to them. "Dr. Rodriguez says if we start the treatment tomorrow, the prognosis is actually very good. Better than good." Sarah closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, her breathing seemed to ease. "I can't let you pay for this," she said weakly. "It's too much, after everything I put you through." "Sarah," Marcus said, and his voice was firm, "you're the mother of my daughter. You're the woman I've loved for 22 years, even when I couldn't find you. This isn't charity. This is family." Maya felt something shift inside her chest, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. Family. She'd spent her entire life feeling incomplete, like she was missing some essential part of herself. Now she understood what that part was. Not just a father, but the knowledge that she was wanted, that she came from love, that her existence wasn't an accident or a burden, but a choice that two people had made together. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical consultations, insurance forms, and treatment plans. Marcus handled the financial arrangements while Maya stayed with her mother, both of them trying to process the seismic shift their lives had just undergone. "Are you angry with me?" Sarah asked when they were alone. Maya considered the question. Was she angry? She'd spent years resenting a father who had supposedly abandoned them, only to discover that he'd been searching for them the entire time. She'd grown up poor and struggling, only to learn that her father was wealthy enough to solve all their problems with a phone call. She'd stolen money from the one person who would have given her anything she asked for. But looking at her mother now, frail and sick but alive, with hope in her eyes for the first time in months, Maya found that anger wasn't what she felt. "I'm not angry," she said finally. "I'm sad. I'm sad for all the time we lost. All the birthdays he missed, all the nights you cried thinking you were alone, but I'm not angry." "You did what you thought was best." Sarah squeezed her hand. "He's a good man, Maya. I hope you'll give him a chance to be the father he's always wanted to be." "I think I'd like that," Maya said, and meant it. When Marcus returned, he brought coffee and sandwiches, and they sat together in the hospital room like the family they'd never had the chance to be. The conversation was awkward at first. 22 years of separation couldn't be bridged in a single evening, but there were moments of connection that felt like glimpses of what they might have been. Marcus told them about his business, about the foundation he'd started, that helped single mothers get job training and education. "I always wondered if that was my way of trying to help you, even though I couldn't find you," he admitted. Maya told him about her job at the diner, about her dreams of going back to school, about the stories she wrote in her spare time that she'd never shown anyone. She was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him, how he listened with the kind of attention that made her feel like her words mattered. "I'd like to read your stories sometime," he said, "if you'd be comfortable sharing them." "They're not very good," Maya said automatically. "I doubt that," Marcus replied. "You're your mother's daughter." "She always had a way with words." Sarah smiled, the first real smile Maya had seen from her in weeks. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Marcus said quietly. "Every conversation, every laugh, every dream we shared. I've been carrying all of it with me for 22 years. As the night wore on, Maya found herself watching her parents with fascination. Despite the years apart, despite the pain and misunderstanding, there was still something between them, a connection that had survived separation and silence. It wasn't the young love they'd shared at 19, but it was something deeper, something that had been tested by time and loss and had somehow endured. "What happens now?" Maya asked as the sun began to rise outside the hospital windows. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look that seemed to communicate volumes. "Now we figure it out," Marcus said. "All of us, together. Your mother's treatment will take several months. I'd like to be here for that, if you'll let me. And after? Maya asked. After we see what kind of family we can build from here, Sarah said. It won't be traditional, and it won't erase the past, but maybe it can be something good. Maya thought about the money still in her pocket, the $3,000 she'd stolen from her father's wallet. She pulled it out and set it on the bedside table. I need to give this back, she said. I took it from your wallet before I knew who you were. Marcus looked at the money, then at Maya, and smiled. Keep it, he said. Consider it 22 years of allowance. That's not funny, Maya said, but she was smiling too. Actually, it kind of is, Sarah said, and then they were all laughing, quietly, so as not to disturb other patients, but genuinely. It was the first time Maya could remember laughing with both her parents, and the sound felt like healing. 6 months later, Maya stood in the kitchen of Marcus's house, their house now, making breakfast while her mother sat at the kitchen table, healthy and strong, reading the newspaper. The experimental treatment had worked better than anyone had dared to hope. Sarah was in complete remission, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis. The transition hadn't been easy. 22 years of separation couldn't be erased overnight, and there had been difficult conversations, moments of awkwardness, and the challenge of learning to be a family when none of them quite knew what that looked like. But they'd figured it out together, one day at a time. Maya had quit her job at the diner and enrolled in college, majoring in journalism with a focus on social justice reporting. Marcus had insisted on paying for her education, and while Maya had initially resisted, she'd eventually accepted it as part of the process of learning to let people help her. And there's an article here about your father's latest foundation, Sarah said, looking up from the newspaper. He's funding a program to help families navigate the healthcare system when they can't afford treatment. Maya smiled. It was still strange to hear her mother refer to Marcus as your father, so casually, but it was getting more natural every day. He told me about that. He said it was inspired by our situation. He's turning our pain into purpose, Sarah said. That's very like him. Marcus appeared in the doorway, dressed for work but moving slowly, as if reluctant to leave. This had become his routine, lingering over breakfast, finding excuses to stay a few minutes longer, as if he was still afraid that if he left, they might disappear again. Good morning, ladies, he said, kissing Sarah's cheek and squeezing Maya's shoulder as he passed. Morning, Dad, Maya said, and watched his face light up the way it did every time she called him that. They'd talked about what to call him in those early weeks. Marcus felt too formal, but Dad felt presumptuous. It was Sarah who had finally settled the matter. He's been your father since the day you were born, she'd said. The title was always his. You're just finally able to use it. I have a meeting with the foundation board this morning, Marcus said, pouring himself coffee. But I should be home by 6. Maya, didn't you say you had something you wanted to show us tonight? Maya nodded, feeling nervous excitement flutter in her stomach. I finished the story, the one I've been working on. The one about us, Sarah asked. About us, but bigger than us, Maya said. About families that get broken and find ways to heal. About the choices we make when we're scared, and how love can survive even when we think we've destroyed it. Marcus sat down at the table, his coffee forgotten. I'd be honored to read it. It's not a happy story, Maya warned. I mean, it has a happy ending, but there's a lot of pain in the middle. The best stories usually do, Sarah said gently. Pain is what makes the healing meaningful. Maya looked at her parents, her family, and felt that familiar sense of wonder at how her life had changed. A year ago, she'd been a poor girl, stealing from strangers to save her dying mother. Now she was a daughter, learning what it meant to be loved unconditionally by two people who had spent 22 years finding their way back to each other and to her. I was thinking, she said, about submitting it to some magazines, maybe trying to get it published. I think that's a wonderful idea, Marcus said. The world needs to hear stories like ours, stories about second chances and the power of forgiveness. And about the importance of asking for help instead of trying to steal it, Maya added with a wry smile. Especially that, Sarah laughed. As Marcus left for work and Sarah settled in with her book, Maya sat down at her laptop to make final edits to her story. She thought about that night in the hospital, about the moment when desperation had driven her to theft, about the impossible coincidence that had led her to steal from the one person who would have given her anything. But maybe it hadn't been coincidence at all. Maybe it had been fate, or destiny, or simply the universe's way of bringing a family back together. Maybe sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes, and maybe sometimes you have to lose yourself completely before you can find where you truly belong. Maya began to type, and the words flowed like water, like truth, like hope. She wrote about a girl who thought she was alone in the world, about parents who loved each other enough to let go and loved their daughter enough to find their way back, about the healing power of honesty and the redemptive nature of forgiveness. And as she wrote, Maya realized that this story, her story, wasn't really about theft or coincidence or even reunion. It was about the truth that love doesn't disappear just because we can't see it, and that family isn't just about blood or proximity or shared history. It's about choice and commitment and the willingness to keep showing up for each other, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when you're not sure how the story will end. Outside, the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the kitchen where 3 people had learned to be a family. And somewhere in the city, other families were struggling, other people were making desperate choices, other stories of loss and love and redemption were beginning to unfold. But in this moment, in this house, in this imperfect but beautiful family that had been broken and healed and made stronger in the breaking, there was peace. Maya smiled as she typed the final words of her story, knowing that sometimes the best endings are really just new beginnings in disguise. If this story moved you, or if you believe in the power of second chances and the importance of never giving up on the people we love, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because we all deserve to know that no matter how lost we feel, no matter how broken our families might seem, there's always hope for healing, always a chance for love to find its way home.